The day Tata started 100 years back, they were a startup. Papers survive more than people.
How difficult is it to make a fund? Or should I ask you how easy it is to make a fund?
Never really thought I would, but I've raised in excess of $2 billion. If you tell me a project for 5 years can sustain a 22-23% debt with a fixed repayment, with all the uncertainties that developers take, it is impossible. Banks are risk-free, NBFCs, HFCs are moderate risk, and AIS is where you're taking equity risk. So I got to know later on why Rustomjee is called Rustomjee.
You are founder of Mount K Capital. Firstly, why the name Mount K Capital?
From the first day that humans existed to now, it's always that real estate has been a part of your life. Every part of your life is real estate.
What point of time a developer should consider taking funds from an AIF?
Bhavan uncle says this very proudly. More competition means more marketplace. More marketplace means you will get rewarded for your hard work.
Hello everyone, today with us we have Ms. Binita Dalal, who has experience about 2 decades in the finance industry. She is the founder of Mount K Capital and also head of fundraising at the Rustomjee Group. She is co-convener at the CredI Youth Wing and is also managing committee member of the CredI MCHI. How has your days been? Since I already know that your past weekend was very...
It's normal. When you are part of real estate, you should love every day, because every day something new happens. Every day something great happens, and every day you learn something new. Either the industry teaches you or you teach yourself.
Definitely here to learn things from you as well, like every day. I'm going to extract as much as finance knowledge I can today and learn as much as I can from you. So
We will both learn. I'm also still learning finance every day. We still learn real estate every day, because every day the regulation changes. Every day the government wants us to make something new a part of something what is already under construction. So we're still learning. We'll all learn. We learn finance also.
20 years down the line and still learning. Great journey. Great.
It's been a great journey. I don't think I ever predicted that I would be in finance in this way. Never really started off with a goal of finance. I knew I wanted to do something in finance because of the fact that my granddad was a banker. So it's something that I always had. And dad always brought me up telling me stories about how granddad, did so well in banking and being a private banker. And real estate happened very
What was
by
your
chance.
education?
Oh, so I'm a marketing major and I'm running finance. And I was an undergrad in marketing, freshly out of college, wanted to get into getting some practical knowledge of, real estate and probably industry before I go for my MBA. So got picked up, handpicked by TCS. Only 2 undergrads got picked up in TCS in its history and made it through in that. Then got into real estate, did my practical knowledge with Godrej Properties. Then while I was doing that, I worked on education, because education has always been a passion for me. I truly believe that if you ever want to improve the future of a country, you need to strengthen the base, and the base is always education. And I genuinely feel that as the world's most populated country and the highest GDP in very large ways to the world contributor, our education system needs a lot that needs to come through. And that's why I worked on setting up the Rustomjee Business School in parallel. And then finally got words of wisdom from our founders. And I was told that I can do philanthropy all my life, but if I really want to understand what real business is, I should get into the business and understand real estate. And that's how I joined real estate. Little I knew I was joining at a time when the world was going through global financial crisis.
Right.
So I joined and the Lehman crisis happened. So largely, I think my finance journey became very on-the-job learning, practical. And I learned a lot of finance because of the global financial crisis. The proverb that people say that chaos brings a lot of opportunity and it brings a lot of, I would say, new learnings and new ventures coming out of it and successes. That was probably my time. They say that you have to be at the right time for the right learning and the right place. I think that was for me in the place. And as much as the Lehman financial crisis was a very bad situation for the world, I think it gave all of us a founding lesson that I'm never going to forget in my life.
What was that crisis?
The global financial crisis was actually driven by a mortgage crisis in the US, where
That AAA bonds
there was a default in the mortgages by Lehman, and Lehman shut down as a bank. So US is a little different. You can file for bankruptcy and you can shut down and someone else buys you. A bank or a financial institution never shuts down. Someone else comes and buys you out and it continues to go. Businesses largely do shut down and file for bankruptcy and get wound up. But banks and financial institutions continue
to run
because they are the base of what runs in all our lives. Like, as much as we don't believe in it, every measurement of our personal success, personal,
milestone achievement.
I wouldn't say milestone achievement, but when you set out on a journey, you always measure it with a number.
Right.
You always measure it with a value. All that is driven by currencies and it's driven by money.
100%.
Unless you want to go to the Himalayas and get nirvana, then it's only in your personal equation what you want to develop and grow as a mental and an emotional quotient. But largely, most of your measurements of success and failure and everything comes from the fact that you are looking at a number and a measurement of number attached to some currency. So it's been something that's been a number and a value that's always attached to all our existence. But we largely don't realize that, and we don't give it its due importance unless we go through some kind of a situation in life. I think Lehman was exactly that. It taught me my base in finance, and it really, really strengthened me in understanding how one has to read finance. Because finance is a very loosely used and abused word. I mean, whether you're taking a loan or whether you're raising equity or whether you're managing what you have as an account balance, everything comes as finance. But no one really understands what is finance and what what kind of an impact it can have on your existence.
Since it has been around 20 years of you being in the finance industry, you might have seen a huge evolvement, huge change on how the industry works. If you can speak about how the ways of financing have worked, how has the industry evolved from 20 years back to today?
So I'll give you an account from 2008 to now for sure. But I think when you talk about finance, what you largely don't understand is anything or any project life cycle in real estate needs various types of money. Okay? It's not one frame fits all or, one solution fits all kind of a situation. It is very situational and it's very dependent on what the underlying project is and what the underlying use of that money and need is. Most of us, when we run businesses, neglect this aspect because we feel it's too boring, it's too much numbers, and largely finance get typecasted with accounts. And largely when someone looks at a CFO, they're like, oh, the CFO also. CFO means what? वो balance sheet लेके आएगा, देखेगा, and मतलब balance sheet मुनीम जी. But that is not what finance is. Finance and fundraising is a very different part of your business, and accounts and tax and compliance is a very different part of your business.
Initially, in a small organization, everything starts up in a accounts department में ही सब कुछ होता है.
कुछ नहीं होता है. Your initially small startup में your promoter is only running finance.
Right.
मतलब small. I'll give you an example. If you are doing one small building and it's your first building, your promoter will meet the customer, your promoter will meet the investor, and your promoter will meet the banker. Banker तो आएगा ही नहीं. Anyways, banking and the banking industry thinks developers come from a very colored background, so they don't really look at new age or first time developers. They wait for them to kind of mature to some amount of years of existence and some amount of square footage delivered before they kind of start looking at a developer to fund. But your customer and your private banker is your support at that point in time, and everything is run by the promoter. When it starts getting structured, and most real estate companies, and I can say this because I've seen Rustomjee grow and evolve since the day it started. I was probably 6-7 years when we did our first Bhumi Pujan, and kind of from there on, I've seen it, and I've seen how, everyone who was there was literally standing and meeting every customer. I've seen our founders literally stand at exhibitions and sell apartments as well. Because that's the journey that you go through when you start off firstly in the first few years of your journey, and then you kind of evolve and teams come in and you grow it and you structure it. But most organizations, the largest, whether it's the Tata Sons or whether it is the Reliance, they grow in the initial years very sporadically and structure gets a little tough to create. It's through the evolution where structure comes in and the right, set of people come in. And then you recognize finance and you recognize the importance of how it is, because this is the raw material for real estate. This sector is heavy capex. Every asset that you buy comes with a very large check size. Also, the product is a very large check size. So your land is a large check size and your product is a large check size. And to fund that capex, one needs to understand what is the project life cycle and what kind of money is needed at what stage. Earlier, land used to get funded by banks. Very unfortunate that it got abused and banks then shut down funding land. So then people had to go to NBFCs and HFCs to get land funding, because no developer has unlimited equity to put in land. It is impossible. There's always a partnership between either a bank or a fund, or now it gets into equity structures where you have private equity partners coming in. So each stage needs different type of finance. After 2008, until the world recovered from the global financial crisis, new amount of funds came up, new amount of NBFCs came up, and they started supporting the sector. After that, you had a full new set of, I would say, equity partners that came in after the 2018 ILFS crisis. So from 2008 all the way till 2018, market recovered, banks grew, HFCs grew, NBFCs grew. Then one fine day, ILFS as a crisis happened.
What was ILFS?
So ILFS was a NBFC, HFC fund, all three. It used to lend largely to infrastructure.
Okay.
But it also lent a very large amount to real estate. It used to raise money from So I'll tell you something very boring. It's a very boring thing, but it's the base of finance. And if you see a lot of reels online, you'll see this, that banks don't operate with their own money. Banks are nothing but a middleman who takes money from depositors, gives it to the borrowers, and in that process, what happens is it makes a buck on it. That same process is replicated through HFCs, NBFCs, funds everywhere. No one has unlimited equity of their own to grow their capital. So, same way, ILFS used to borrow, say at 6%, 7%, and it used to lend at 15%. So, in the process, it used to make money. But the difference is that at each stage, the level of risk goes up in terms of the pricing of the money that you raise. So when ILFS raised money from the world and it lent downward, a lot of its loans went bad and it couldn't recover its money, which caused a default of ILFS to its investors. And a lot of them were banks. So, and NBFCs, and there was too many challenges and scandals and all that stuff. So banks stopped funding NBFCs in a very large way and HFCs, because they kind of said that there's too much of short-term borrowing and long-term lending. Your real estate loans are a good amount of 4 to 5 years tenure. But bank CPs, basically commercial papers that bank give to corporates. Like today, if a Reliance wants to borrow, they'll go and raise a CP, a commercial paper, and they'll get money at a rated paper will get money in single digits, like base rate being 8, so base rate plus 0.5 or whatever.
How much is the time period for
CPs
lending, borrowing in?
For short term are between 6 months to 1 year. So what happens is, like, we all plan our cash flows, like we all get our pocket monies and we spend it, and we all get money and our earnings and we spend it, and we know how much we're earning and how much we're giving. Same way these institutions run their treasury book, where they borrow from these institutions and they lend ahead. So when they lend ahead, they have a repayment tenure. So they assume that if we've raised 10 rupees from institution A and lent to developer B or borrower B, this 10 rupees is coming back to me in 6 months, or an earlier lending is maturing. So it's basically rotating. So the incoming money defaulted and the repayment defaulted to the institution. This led to banks and mutual funds to stop funding these commercial papers to these institutions. So that caused a liquidity crisis in a whole host of NBFCs and HFCs. Banks were still okay because they are they are allowed to take deposits. NBFCs and HFCs are not allowed to take deposits from the public market. They can only raise money from mutual funds, or they can list their organizations and raise public equity, but they really cannot accept deposits. Very few people have a deposit taking license. When that happened, there was a whole new way of lending. So if I have to simplify it and make it as simple, earlier if I wanted to buy land, banks could fund it at, say, a sub 10 or 10% rate. After 2008, that same land, if I have to buy and I have to raise my money, I have to go to an NBFC and HFC, because banks were funding the NBFC and HFC, they were not funding me. So they had a middleman in line. So bank gave the middleman gave me. So my 10% with his profit became, say, 15-16% to a good developer for land. But to a new developer, that 10% became 22%. Okay? Then after the IL&FS crisis, that 15% money also is not available, because banks did not have that much liquidity to give large checks to developers. So that money went back to various other routes, either through an AIF, through a fund, to a private equity partner, where it literally became, say, again it became 22% upward. So your land prices also went up, your cost of funding land went up, and your availability of liquidity for land funding went down. So these are the nuances that one needs to understand when you look at classifying an asset and you look at funding an asset, or you look at funding for an asset. Because if you tell me a project for 5 years can sustain a 22-23% debt with a fixed repayment, with all the uncertainties that developers take, it is impossible. It is impossible, because no project can sustain that much high cost of debt. And a very large reason why you had the Lehman crisis or the IL&FS crisis is because people lent with an expectation that you get a very high debt return, which is not the case. It's an equity return that you're looking at through a debt structure, or a number of 22% is generally in the equity markets. Okay? And you cannot substitute that and say, I want a monthly cash flow and delay my project and say, I want a fixed return on such things. It doesn't work. So those are the learnings that came out from IL&FS and so on and so forth. That's why when I say you have to understand how to classify an asset and how to fund it. So when you are in your land stage, until you launch, your project can take X cost of money. Once you launch, it gets de-risked. Your cost of borrowing has to come down for the asset to survive. And then when you achieve full financial closure, you're technically risk-free. So your cost of borrowing has to further come down, and you have to start repaying your debt and your equities, so that people get their timely money back and that cycle rolls.
Got it.
It's very simple and sounds simple, but when you get to implementing it, it's quite tough, because the world needs to start accepting that this is how the monies need to get priced. Like I said, a bank is nothing but a middleman who's collected money and needs to pay back. So he has made a promise to you that I have to give you a return.
Right.
This is the promise to you. He's then pricing his loans, and he's pricing his timing and running his balance sheet, because he also needs to show profit. But this entire concept of being driven with, I have to give back to this person, so you have to give back to me, is not helping this sector at large. And that's where you get you need to get creative in how you have to get your money for your asset and when you have to give your exit. Otherwise, it is tough today. It's quite fierce, the competition, and it's very tough in the real estate sector also to, constantly replicate things when regulation is tightening up. So after IL&FS, RBI tightened up its regulation. Earlier, you had 3 regulators in the finance industry: NHB, RBI, and SEBI. After 2018, because most of your HFCs and NBFCs used to report into NHB, and RBI came down heavy on NHB, saying that why didn't you kind of check what was happening in IL&FS? NHB started, the entire NHB regulation, or all your HFCs and NBFCs started reporting into RBI. When that happened, which means you have only 2 regulators now, which is RBI and SEBI, most of them are very risk averse. They are only interested in protecting the end consumer and protecting themselves. So I don't think any regulator can protect themselves, because they are a law.
They are kind of trying to give out loan to lesser riskier
They are very
enterprises.
clear that, so if you ask me today, this is my interpretation. banks look at risk-free money lending. So once your project has matured, it's got all its approvals, then is when banks will come in.
That's why they are doing only construction financing.
Or they are, but also residential projects don't need construction financing, because if you fund the land and fund the approvals, technically by sales you are able
Major amount
you're supposed to
is
build it.
invested.
So that doesn't, technically that's not a business that banks should go after, because it's not much of value and the return is also less. HFCs and NBFCs have shrunk in number, so the capital available there is very limited, and again that capital is expensive. So you need to find a way then where you can roll that out faster, or it gets de-risked and priced lesser. They also will not fund land, because RBI came down heavy on the regulation and said you cannot fund land or you cannot fund projects until you don't get approvals, which gave rise to another asset class, which is funds, which always existed. But today, now, what NBFCs used to do, AIFs are doing at a fixed rate of return. Again, as I look at it, banks are risk-free, NBFCs, HFCs are moderate risk, and AIS is where you're taking equity risk. That's how the entire division has happened by the regulators. And I think it's fair, because you have domain experts that run AIFs and funds today. You have domain experts that look at HFCs and NBFCs for the real estate sector. And you don't need domain expertise in a bank to give construction funding, because you are largely de-risked. You have it in place. You have RERA as a regulator there. So I understand why they have done this, and I understand how they have bucketed it, and it works. But it has created immense shortage of capital for the sector, for land funding as an asset class.
Can we talk about 3 phases? Like, what are the modes of financing during land acquisition? Modes of financing once it reaches where the construction is going to start, and maybe in some later stage, what would be the best way to finance further if needed?
If I have to break it down into land stage, construction stage, and post-delivery stage, I'll break it down for you on a residential asset and a commercial assets, because they're 2 different asset classes. Land stage, your only availability or avenue is self-equity. Okay? And you can either get a private lender or a private partner, where someone comes in and gives you a check. He's not a bank, he's not an NBFC, but he's an investor in real estate and he wants to partner with you. Or you formalize it and go to a AIF, and you take probably a debt product from them, which is a debt. So basically, an AIF, which is a debt AIF, will come and tell you that I'm giving you 10 rupees, but you have to give me a fixed annualized return of 17% compounded interest.
That's the market rate.
For good guys, 17. For new guys, it goes up to 19. And some fees and so on and so forth. And they structure it where you have a fixed of, say, a lower amount, and balance comes from an equity upside. So there are various structures that they do. Okay. That is for your land stage. Construction, so that is land and approvals, because today banks can't fund approvals. So that's land and approvals.
For approvals also, it's fine for the NBFCs or AIF fund managers to invest that money into approvals.
So your approvals today are not funded by banks. They have a restriction on funding TDR and fungible FSI and FSIs. So that is out. Your HFCs can fund it after you have your basic RERA. That also, they don't do it for all. They'll do it very selectively. So largely of your land and approvals come from AIFs. Okay. Once you have your approvals, then bank gives you construction funding. Once you have financial closure, technically you should repay the residential asset. You can also do receivables funding if you have completed sales and you are still receiving money after some time. But in residential assets, that doesn't work, because people all pay against construction link and there's no need. This is not like another market where people will pay you 5 years after possession. It doesn't work that way. So that's how it works for residential. For commercial, you again have a very heavy dependency on AIFs, because neither land nor interest during construction can be funded by banks or HFCs. So a very large amount of it comes from an AIF, which is your equity funding. Construction funding comes from banks once you have approvals. But interest, obviously, you have to try and find your own way of funding the equity for it. And once it's finished, you do your LRDs or LAPs, which banks do it at a great rate.
Moving on, you are founder of Mount K Capital. Firstly, why the name Mount K Capital?
It's a little long story, but I'll try and precise it. Mount K is Mount Kailash. Okay. Keystone is the holdco of Rustomjee.
Right.
So the K came from there. And Mount Kailash is something that I'm extremely, I would say, intrigued about. I'm not really a religious person, but I'm a very spiritual person. For me, it's not about, following this or doing that. But if it makes sense and the energy makes sense too, so I follow it. That mountain has importance in 4 different religions. 4 different rivers flow out of it. It is known as the home of the creator of this earth and the strength of this earth, which is Lord Shiva. And I'm in the business of creating homes. So, and funding them. And for me, honestly, finance is the strength with which you can achieve most of your dreams. I'm not saying it in a very crude way, but I think it's a very important part of building businesses and building and expanding your vision, which people genuinely think when you talk about money, they think that, oh, this person is very money-minded and so on and so forth. But honestly, money is important for expansion, for growth, for CapEx, for everything. And this sector is heavy CapEx. So for me, money is an important part. And it literally, for me, is a strength of a developer. Why does someone look at your net worth when they assess whether you should be given a project or not, or you should be handed over a contract or not? Because that is your strength. And that's what Mount Kailash is. It is not a mountain that you can summit because it's banned. You can only go around that mountain. And it has a vibration which makes you, it makes you alive. Okay. It takes great strength to have a vibration. And in your vicinity, 2 lakes, one is called Mansarovar and one is called Patal Ganga, separated by a small strait of sand. One is extremely rough and one is extremely calm. Now, everyone says when you go to that mountain, you hear Om and stuff like that. I have never experienced it because I have never been there. But I know this, that you need to take 13 external parikramas or rounds of that mountain before you can go inside the mountain and do a parikrama, where they have a small little mountain where people say it is man-made and it looks like the Nandi. So it's a very intriguing aspect. A lot of people say it's connected with, the dinosaurs, the asteroids and so on and so forth, because it doesn't seem like a natural forming mountain. It seems like a man-made mountain. For me, all that doesn't matter. It's just the curiosity and the strength that mountain had is the reason why I called it Mount Kailash. And it's something that I've been intrigued of for the last 7-8 years. So I always had a Mount Kailash picture on my laptop, on my iPad, as something that I open every time. The first thing I see in the morning is that. So that's how it kind of stayed. So it was Mount K Capital. And my fund size is 790. The reason why it is 790 and not anything else is because when we were creating the name of the company, we registered Mount K Capital in 2021. My dad believes in numerology and he believed in it all throughout. And he said that the company should be equal to 79. I never really bothered or asked why. And I went ahead. Once your parents tell you something, you do it. You don't really look back and ask. So later on, I realized that all the shivlings in the country are on a 79 longitude or latitude. And Mount Kailash is on 81. And honestly, all the shivlings are in one straight line. So whether it is Kedarnath, Badrinath and all are on the same axis. And that's how he said 79 and I did it. And that's how we kept our fund size also 790. So that is the small story as to why Mount K and why not anything else. Because it was something that I was always intrigued on, and it takes, when you're building something, you need some inspiration and some curiosity and some strength. And that is what was mine.
Great. It puts heaviness into the name of the fund and the company as well.
So I got to know later on why Rustomjee is called Rustomjee. It is named after our founder, Mr. Bhavan Irani's dad. And when he told us this story, that when the first Bhumi Pujan was happening, his mom refused to come until he didn't agree to name the brand Rustomjee. Because she said that if you put your father's name on a building, you will ensure his name is never sullied. And you will ensure that building stands for everything that your father stands for. And it was something that was so simple. And it was so great of her to do and give us this legacy and leave us with this legacy that, I said, when I want to build my fund or when I want to build it, I want to build it on something when I know that I will never do something wrong to spoil its name. I'll never do something which is not on the right side of it. So that's how Mount K Capital.
Great story attached to the name. Interesting to know. Coming to the fund of Mount K Capital, the Mount K Resi Development Fund. How difficult is it to make a fund? Or should I ask you how easy it is to make a fund?
Nothing is ever easy. I think, your first question as to how my day is and how does it work. I think for the longest, goes back to 2008. I remember when 2008 happened, there were days that we were in office till, I remember this clearly. 31st December 2008, all of us were in office till about 10-11.
21st December.
31st December 2008. We were all in office till about 10-11. 1st Jan, again, we were back at work. Because those were tough times. You had to be there throughout and throughout. And everyone was in office at 10 o'clock on 1st Jan. There was no New Year's, there was nothing. And for the longest after that, and post that phase, I have spent most of my days in just trying to recreate various pools of finance and do things. Because I was young, I joined freshly out of college. For me, it was the curiosity of learning drove me every day to get back. And never really thought I would, but I've raised in excess of $2 billion. It's not something that, it sounds great and all, but it is backed by a lot of difficulty and lot of things. Like, it's not easy for so people used to treat me like a kid, and people still do treat me like a kid, which I love the fact that they show it as love. But imagine a 24-year-old girl walking into the chairman of an office of a bank and asking him for a loan for a real estate company. I mean, it's funny. 1 girl, 2nd real estate, 3 very young. It's tough to go up to a 60-year-old person sitting in that chair and get him to respect you. So it's been something that I have seen, and probably today it's evolved, and I'm quite okay to kind of, go through the motions today. It's not, when you say it's difficult, it's always difficult, because when you are raising a fund and you're creating a business in an industry which is largely male driven, it's always going to have its two sides of it. But I think I'm blessed, and I thank my blessings every day that I approach it differently. Like when we were starting up this fund, it was a conversation, and it was something that has been in me ever since we kind of, So when we did our private equities across the years in the group, that's when I got intrigued of how this fund works and how this business works and so on and so forth. And I understood a lot of it. And then we did a JV with Keppel Land in 2020, peak COVID. Again, a crazy story, but Keppel Land came into our group. The only residential equity the country has seen was that equity deal that was done. It was something that took the life out of me because COVID, Singapore counterparty. Keppel Land is a subsidiary of Temasek, which is backed by government of Singapore. So that full process was a process. But when that happened, that's when I was like, now it is the right time for us to get into this business. And that's when this journey started. October 2020, Keppel invested with us. Next day, I was already sitting with the fund plan, and I was like, this is what I want to do. And funny story, so it was, we had a real estate background, but I needed someone to come in with the fund management background. And that's where a friend of mine used to be working with IFL and then moved to various other funds, and then, was in Welspun, and he came to our office. His name was Abdi Ali. He came to office, and, we were just having a conversation, and he's like, why aren't you doing it? I said, honestly, I'm contemplating raising a fund of our own and, building this as a business. And one conversation led to the other. 2021 November, we had kind of, registered the company and we started our fund journey. And come May 5th, we had filed with SEBI for our approvals, 2022. Because November we registered and then, May 5th, we kind of filed with SEBI for our application for the license. Generally, it takes about 4 to 6 months to get your license. In less than 60 days, we get an email saying our fund is approved. And we really didn't expect it because we are like, it's a real estate fund. It's, got a developer backing it. It's very this thing. We were like, it'll come. First set of queries will come, second set of queries. Less than 60 days, we got our approvals. And we're like, what do? We were planning to start our roadshow like 6 months down the line. So we had to prepone everything. I was in a celebration with the HDFC team and Mr. Parekh was there. And Mr. Parekh comes back and tells me, what did you guys do to get your approval in less than 60 days? Most my funds have taken 6 months to a year after my intervention as well. And I never got a license that fast. How is it that you got a license that soon? So he said, we have no idea. I guess because you spent so much time in correcting the system at SEBI responded earlier to us and gave us the license faster. Or maybe they know that we are your partners, so they kind of got kind to us. So he was laughing and all. But it was something which was unheard of. And I think after us, most people got their licenses early, which is a good thing SEBI has done to kind of expedite this process. But yeah, we started off on our journey. We started fundraise in July, August and did our first close in Jan 2023. Did not really imagine the kind of support that we would get. It's always tough to raise the first money, but we got great partners. Ashutosh Taparia is someone that we look up to throughout from Famicare because JP Saab and him have not just been a partner as an investor, but honestly a true partner where they help you in the full process. And that's why we kind of built it. State Bank of India has been part of Rustomji's journey since the longest. I remember walking into their offices very young in my life and, they've been there for us. Most of them are family to me. I don't count them apart from the fact that they've not ever been there. And honestly, I've seen that entire management evolve and I'm so proud of that institution. Like my first loan ever that I raised for the group was in SBI and I learned the basis of finance from them. Like literally sat there, made a proposal myself with the analyst, made it, saw it through. So that's been my foundation of banking as such. And they never do AIFs and they never do real estate first-time funds. But I think what they understood that we were building was something that intrigued and made sense and value to them. And that's why they, for the first time, from their personal treasury book, came into the fund. So we closed our first fund with the first round. From a $100 million fund, we raised about, say, 50 million in our first round. And we kind of
350
closed
crores.
it. Yeah, we closed it at that. Now we're raising our final round and we'll kind of close our fund in a month's time. So we'll be fully raised. And we will also be fully deployed by second half of this year. And then we will go into round 2. And that was exactly what we were building with this. So Mount K Capital is a platform that we're building where we want to show investors that there is returns in real estate. You just need the right structure and right partner. People have burnt their hands in real estate with investments, with this and that. And it's been very, very tough for investors also in this journey. And that's what we wanted to change. And that's where, when Abdeli and me were talking, we said, what is it that we'll do differently? And we said that we will build a true partnership with alignment of interest, which is also an abused word. But we said we'll really put it down in its true essence and we'll prove it to the world. The only reason why in the first round we went ahead and we said we'll do it with Rustomji as a development partner and we'll bring Rustomji to it. A, because Rustomji wants to build this as a business. B, we come with development experience. We come with the ability to see the cycle through. Okay? What is your interest in life apart from making these podcasts?
Eventually, it will be participating in the business and making it go to great heights. This podcast is a learning experience for me where I wouldn't get this experience if I wouldn't be doing this.
Correct.
To be able to get to industry leaders and getting their few hours is quite valuable, and when would I get this knowledge that you're giving it to me?
So when you started doing podcasts and you must have researched it, you would have seen people who've done it and kind of got the nuts and bolts together.
Right.
I don't know jack shit about podcasts. Okay. I don't know how to create one. I don't know how to build one. I don't know how to create a podcast IP, but you have.
Right.
Okay. Today, if I want to, as an investor, back a podcast, I would back you because you would be able to run it, get the viewership and get my money back.
Right.
Imagine me being an investor and giving a Novoice the money to build a podcast and valuing that person's podcast. You must be having, say, thousands of views. That guy must be having, say, 30, 40 views. Okay? Imagine that I have to build this podcast with someone and invest with someone to get my return. But I value a 30, 40 viewer podcast at the same price at which I value your podcast, which is my mistake because I don't understand podcast. Today, you will be able to value a podcast better. And you know the risk and you know how to sell a podcast. You know how to build it from scratch. You know what kind of things to market in it. You know all of that. This Novice doesn't know it, but I'm still willing to back him and not you. Imagine what funds have done and fund managers have done. It's not their fault, but it's this. It's like the investor has gone and partnered with a wrong person, overvalued that person's asset, and in that process, not have the knowledge to underwrite risk. It starts with not having the knowledge to underwrite risk. It's not bad. It's not this thing. I think we all learn. And we only learn with mistakes. All the guys who run funds have been a great success and have been great mentors to me. And I learn the most from them. But I come from a development background. I know what kind of risk is attached to an asset. It's easier for me to take investors' money, underwrite it for the right asset and the right developer and see the process through, including tomorrow something goes wrong, finish the asset and give back the investors' money. Unfortunately, traditional fund managers did not come with that background. Like most assets that went into stress, they found developers to come and finish it. So that is the difference that we wanted to build with Mount K, where we said we'll come with a known partner, we'll come with a known set of assets, we will come with the development background, and we will build a platform where investors can participate and they can see what value is getting created and we can divide it equally so there's alignment of interest. That's how we kind of built it. And honestly, never really thought that it'll get built this way, but it has, and it has done very well for a lot of this thing. In fact, a lot of funds kind of replicated our idea and are trying to do it, and that's a true testament of your success. If someone is trying to copy your idea, it's a great thing. I feel very happy when I see so many new funds getting launched and so many new developers coming and saying that, we're doing the same thing. I'm very, very happy about it because I feel proud that what we're creating is trying to get replicated or trying to get copied, and I'm very happy because so many people call and they ask also how your structure is good. But coming back, it's like this. So my passion is food. Apart from real estate and all, I love food. I don't eat as much, but I understand food and I know I kind of follow food. So if I want to build it's like going to the market and trying to sell a Michelin star restaurant without the chef and without the ingredients.
Won't work.
But if I'm able to first get the chef and the ingredients, I can easily get a Michelin star.
Right.
So that's what we've created with this fund. And that's what we want to replicate going across, because we want to partner with great people and we want to partner with great investors and we want to make it a win-win. My high is not about the top line. It's not always about the AUM. It's about the returns you're making for the investor, and it's about the profits a project is making. All of us misconstrued our measurement of success by just seeing the top line, just seeing the net worth. But my friend, you have to see net worth minus liabilities. No, what is the net worth the person has? Not just the fancy part of it. So that's how we've built this, and we've built it that way. It's been great. It is going great. And we're going to start round 2 where we're going to go pan-India. We're going to try and replicate the same model, and we're going to partner with people across the country. And it's very simple. It's like this. It's like you're from real estate. You understand this. If I have to buy a house in Bandra, I need 10 crores. Plus stamp duty, plus GST. Okay? And I have only one asset. and I will buy it at a life cycle which has matured. And I cannot expect my returns to double on that. But
Right.
someone who can put 10 crores in my fund gets the access to manage his money across 10 assets, which are predefined.
So the fund decides where the 10 crores amount
There
will
is a
be.
thesis which has been defined that it is X micro market, X size of development, return of about 22 to 25% and a 2x return, and it has to be less than 5 years of development.
The project.
So it is very defined. My investment thesis is upfront defined and it is approved by SEBI and my IC. Because we are running it as a way in which our entire fund first round is going into Rustomjee, the IC is a decision-making factor, investment committee, and my entire investment committee is external. We didn't want to have everything internal, because if you have it internal, what then happens is people look at it as like, you are only putting your money in your projects. And traditionally, while people have asked us this, most of the funds that exist today, their investment committee is internal.
Okay.
But we are very clear we want external members in the IC. So we have a retired SBI banker, Mr. P.N. Prasad. We have Dhaval Vasunji, who runs, DVN Associate, who's a lawyer, very renowned lawyer in banking sector. We have Gitanji Minchandani, whose last stint was heading GM Financial Real Estate. And we have Ashutosh Taparia himself, who basically is heading Famicare and is been our investor in the fund. And we want his inputs. And that's how we built the entire IC, because it's important that one of the largest investors is also on our IC, because he's also representing the investor base and it helps. So that's how the IC approves all our investments. We take all our investments to the IC and basis that we do it. And we never went to the market with a blind pool. We always went with an identified set of assets. Today also, when we go in for round 2, we're not going to go in blind. We know exactly what markets and who we're going to partner with and what we're going to build. So all that is underway right now for the same thing, because this is a true partnership and a win-win. It's like an investor coming, having the ability to partner in 10 assets, come in at a stage where he's partnering at land stage, but the risk is getting de-risked with the fact that there is progress against it. So you're not buying land, you're seeing approvals against it, and you're kind of, going it up, bringing it up, and is seeing a return. So it's very simple. It's like you buying one apartment versus you having the ability to be part of 10 apartments.
How much does it cost to the developer?
It's an equity fund. It's not a debt fund. There's no fixed return. You have a return of about 22 to 25% that is getting defined.
Got it. Is there any particular exit lock-in period or anything
Your
for
exit
any
is
investor?
from the asset. And these funds which come with a 5-year tenure basically start seeing returns in about 2.5, 3 years.
Start seeing returns after 2.5 years.
2.5, 3 years.
Yes.
So it's a very simplified structure which worked. I'm very excited for round 2.
Mount K Capital has done an exceptional job, considering you have done the first of many, done the first things in many things, like getting the approval in the first 60 days, getting an investor base, SBI investing into this kind of fund for the first time, being the first fund in the country. And
I saw recently a reel from Jack Ma where he said that you don't need to be the best, you need to be the first.
right.
Once you're the first, you will do everything to be the best. And I think I'm happy that our fund has been able to also create new funds in the market, because Maman Uncle says this very proudly. He says this, that more competition means more marketplace means you will get rewarded for your hard work, because that's your differentiator. So I'm very, very happy to see more funds come out, and it's great. I've always seen the side from a developer's eye, been part of CredEye for almost 2 decades now, and I mean, genuinely learned so much, been my alma mater. The reason why I'm going national is also because through CredEye, we understand real estate across the country. We do understand regulation across the country. We know how things work. We have our ears on the ground. It's always easy for someone from a developer background to kind of work on assets across the country and have the right partners to kind of come in times of need. So I think I'm very, very thankful that that platform has given us that opportunity and has given us that learning and that friendship. I think my biggest blessing is the friends that I have through the Credai platform. And I think they are more than family. Literally, I can tell you this, and I can say this, that in lockdown, we kind of built a platform. Me and my friends did something called India Shield, where we were trying to provide aid to people across the country through COVID, right from oxygen cylinders to the works. And that moment, while all of humanity stood for each other, the Credai network was such a blessing because all developers were hands on ground. They all had set up their COVID centers in their premises. They were working towards aid. So for me to kind of mobilize resources across the country was a phone call away. Because as this thing as it sounds, I literally sent stuff to Gondal and to Rajkot and to various remote villages only because I knew there were developers on ground who could help me in that transport process, which was very, very, very unique. I remember getting hospital beds was an issue. But because I knew people in these cities, it was a little easier for me to help the needy at that point in time and help people. It was not even help. It was something I really wanted to do, and it was only the Credai network that helped. That's where I really understood the power of an association and the power of a place like Credai and your friends that you build over there. As much as people say that, you're wasting your time, why are you going for association meetings and so on and so forth, I genuinely think the maximum learning comes in from an association and a network like this. And it's really built me to kind of gear up for round 2 in Mount K and taking this national.
Understood. Was having a conversation with a friend like some days ago, like we were discussing what would you see more, like work, or socialize in an association, get network with people. From what we concluded like this age for us would be the right age to network with people, but after a point of time, you can do a good amount of networking, but still if you don't do the work or the work on the product or your business that much, it won't give you the benefit of network as well.
Yes and no. So there are two things. Please understand that all points in time, people will value you for your product. Even in associations and even in circles, even in everywhere. So there are two things, okay? Your friends are your friends not because of your product. They're your friends because of you, okay? Your business associates will value you because of your product. So it doesn't matter. You have to look at it through that. I don't think my friends are my friends because of my because of my product. My friends are my friends because of me. My industry friends are my friends because of me. And yes, they see the kind of hard work and madness that I put in. But largely, I know that tomorrow, even if I don't put in this madness and hard work, my friends will always be there for me. So it all depends on what you're looking at. And networking, you should network till the last day of your life. Why not? You will learn something with everybody that comes across your life. It's about how much you are able to implement it and what you're able to do about it. I don't really think networking is done with an end game in purpose. It is done with the fact that you are building your own ecosystem, you're building your personal wealth, and you're building your personal knowledge. The biggest thing that you can do is build yourself. So I think that you should do. As far as hard work is concerned, it doesn't matter what the world is seeing and doing or saying. It's about what you want to do. And that should drive you on a daily basis to get up and go to work. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Going back to in your early days time when you said you were 20-year-old going to the 60-year chairman's office and being a girl, wanted to ask, did it make difference then being a girl and doing work?
So I don't come from the mindset of a boy or a girl. My parents never raised me like that. And I'm really thankful to them for building me to the person I am today. Because they never made me feel less because I'm a girl. Or they never told me that your job is to kind of get married and have kids and take care of the house. Or they never really conditioned me, to make me feel that this world is less a platform for you than a boy. So I was allowed to do everything. I was never stopped just because I'm a girl. And I think that comes from the fact that at the very early age, your parents... So kids are born with a blank slate. The reason why kids don't have fear is because no one teaches them fear. They learn fear with time, and that's how their slate gets corrupted. They learn religion with time, and that's how they become very, fanatic with only this and only that. I'm not saying it's bad. It's a personal choice. So I never had that from the base. That gave me a lot of self-strength. It gave me strength to kind of walk in, see men as equals, go to someone and tell them I want this, help me with it. I did face a lot of backlash. Even finance has very little women at the top. It's only off late that you see them. It was very tough. In fact, I also saw discrimination. There was one banker who refused to deal with me because I was a woman. And thankfully, his senior was a lady. So I walked into her cabin, and then she changed his. And I was feeling very bad that person had to move. But the fact is, he was refusing to give me my work. And I never stopped. For me, my end game is my work has to get done. I really don't care how. That's been my focus since day one. I think that has been something that I always have been focused on. For me, it's not about anything but that the work has to get done. And I will move mountains to get my work done. That's my focus, and that's how I've been built. So it didn't matter. That's how I had the courage to walk into a chairman's office also. I have literally dropped emails of my own. And I have got my meetings. Then I have gone with our team. I've taken Baman Uncle. We've gone. We've sat. We've spoken. We've got things done. And that's been the journey. I think probably we're the only few organization that can say that our entire loan book is direct. We've never worked with intermediaries. We've never worked with investment bankers. We don't believe in that concept.
Why?
Because if you're building something with a banker, you're going to be that banker's partner for 5 years. Build it yourself.
Don't the consultants, advisors make the job easier? Like, that's what many people do today.
In which
they
way?
hire advisors.
See,
or
there are two ways.
consultants.
If you don't have a team that's willing to do the work, then for sure they add value to you. But if you have a team that's willing to go and sit with the bankers and understand and then do this on a regular basis, then it's better to do it your own. What is it that a consultant / advisor will do? A, he understands the market. He will come back and tell you how to build it. He'll come back and tell you how to put up your proposal. But then you're entirely dependent on that knowledge for perpetuity. But you are going to be there for longer. You may as well build that expertise. Today, we have access to all banks. We have access to all financial institutions. You are anyways going to be spending time in trying to finish an asset. And you're going to spend time in trying to build that compliance with your banker. You may as well do it upfront. A consultant is not going to do your post-lending compliance. That's you.
It can be a short-term solution if you don't have the people.
That's you, na? No, even if your consultant's job starts the minute you have your sanction and you have the first drawdown. He takes his money and that's it. The rest of the loan journey is still you and your team.
But at any point of time in future also, it's the consultant that's doing the communication or anything.
Yeah.
Or even after the loan book or the letter is sanctioned for the loan amount.
Until your first money is hit your account, he's there. After that, no consultant continues with you until the end of your loan.
Got it. But after that, the point of communication between the developer and bankers also gets so less that it's a lot.
No, that's what you feel, but that's not the case. Nowadays, bankers are literally reviewing your asset on a monthly basis, on a weekly, on a quarterly basis. They're walking into your office and they're coming and meeting you.
Okay.
It has changed, and that's why I'm saying that is going to be your journey. Compliances from RBI have gone up drastically. And if you want to build a relationship and you want to constantly have the ability to raise money from your financial institutions, you need to know them.
It's important to build relationships with the
100%.
bankers themselves without any intermediaries.
100%. Otherwise, how will you know what is happening? And we burnt our hands with a lot of people. And we, a lot of the times what happens is when you have investment bankers, even from the biggest of the biggest institutions representing you to raise money from you, they go and sell it differently than what you do. It's easier for me to sell my product. It's easier for me to sell Mount K because I'm passionate about it. I know exactly what I want from it. It's easier for me to sell a building as Rustomji because I know what goes into making that building and how I'm going to sell it and what is the person and how that money is going to come back to the bank. I don't think an intermediary can speak about it with that much passion. And when you're directly in control, you're directly with them, you learn so much. You know exactly how to structure your proposal. You know exactly how to change the funding. You know exactly how to negotiate better. Today, I can negotiate better than most intermediaries. I've worked that long and I'm able to understand the law. I have sat and read every loan document that we have signed. Nobody does that. I've negotiated clauses. People literally don't like me negotiating on the opposite side of the table, but I have done it. I have the ability to do it today. I understand those clauses and I believe paperwork survives more than people. So why depend on a third party with your paperwork? You're signing it as a company. You need to know what's going into it. And that's why we work directly. I have nothing against them. I think the investment bankers are great as an industry. Most of them are my friends and I really love them a lot. But I think when it's coming to my organization, it is my responsibility to see it through. And that's how I think.
Coming to AIFs again, at what point of time a developer should consider taking funds from an AIF?
Unfortunately, today regulation doesn't allow developers too many places to kind of go for land and approval funding except for AIFs. The problem with AIFs is that it is not available to all. Today, AIFs also are looking at track record. They are looking at people. They have started to give money in... AIFs have still really not gone to tier 2, tier 3 cities in a very large way. They are still in the national metros. So, unfortunately, for smaller cities, that's not the solution even today. It's still your private bankers and lenders and sales and so on and so forth. AIFs are a great solution depending on the cost and the stage of the project. Largely today at land and approval stage, you only get money from AIFs. That's unfortunate and that's regulation driven. That is not market driven. And that is not developer driven. That is not bank driven also. It's regulation driven.
You made a 790 crore AIF, the Mount K Residential Fund. Once it has been fully funded, it has been utilized, that fund ends there.
That first fund ends there. Round 2 will start. Fund 2 will start, which will be national. Which will again be same. It will be largely partnership driven. I think this model works. And within a year's time, when we come up with our first set of project, updates, you'll be able to see how it works. And it really works. It works for both. It works for the developer. It works for the investor. Our entire end game is to kind of build it as a product. And I think it can work.
The first fund is mainly utilized in investing into the MMR.
First fund is largely MMR, largely Rustomjee, in an ecosystem between Andheri to Dadar largely. All projects less than 5 lakh square feet. All projects less than 5 years completion. Round 2 will be not 5 lakh square feet, slightly different. Returns will be in and around the same range, but it would largely be partnership driven. I think the ecosystem has also settled down with all the regulation changes in the banking sector and the SEBI sector. AIF's regulation has got tightened. SEBI has come up with new regulations also to do SME REITs, which is a great thing that they are doing to kind of build it up as a thing. You will see this also further settling down under SEBI. RBI largely has structured banking and NBFCs very well now. I don't think they want to change any more. If they change any more, it should only be for the better. Because everything else is covered. They have put enough restrictions on HFCs, NBFCs, banks. Now they're also coming after AIF. So those things are very well covered. SEBI largely is going to regulate AIFs. So SEBI regulates public markets. So your Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange comes under SEBI. Mutual funds come under SEBI. And your AIFs come under SEBI. CPs, commercial papers, NCDs are all driven by SEBI. IRDA looks at insurance companies. So insurance companies and the investments of insurance companies come under IRDA. And RBI looks at banks and HFCs and NBFCs. So it's very well distributed. They all have learned to de-risk the risk for the investors in these vehicles. My only worry is that they should not de-risk it so much that the investors won't have the freedom to actually do what is needed, as well as the industry won't have the freedom to raise the money. That's the only challenge that I see, because every time RBI/SEBI wants to de-risk a regulation or come down with a regulation which in their mind is de-risking the investor's money or the bank's money, it is only rising up the cost of money to the hands of the developer. And while the government is driven to kind of create homes for all and affordable homes, they forget that every cost of borrowing that goes up makes the end product costlier for the customer. So honestly, there is no affordability in affordable housing anymore. because the cost is so high with the way the regulation is, right from GST in construction cost to cost of borrowing, that it becomes very unaffordable to build affordable housing. I'm happy this podcast is going well. You're able to kind of,
grasp it.
yeah, I thought it would sound like Greek and Latin because most people get really pepped up with finance and they're like,
Having little bit experience of construction finance, little bit.
So you've
able
gone
to
through the roast with a banker.
I have not negotiated, but like have mainly been able to look after the consultants part of job. So moving to REITs, there are only 3 REITs right now in India. So what do you think?
There's an issue with taxation on REITs. That's the reason why there are only 3 REITs. And they'll hopefully change that. But REITs are a great model. Okay. And my first introduction to REITs was in Singapore. We had gone to Singapore to kind of do it. And the taxi driver was telling us what all REITs he's put his investment in.
Okay.
So REITs are nothing but your alternative to mutual funds. Challenge is REITs still need to mature and give that kind of return. So it'll get there. It's a great instrument. Extremely risk-free assets, because you have completed assets that go under REITs. You have rent-generating assets that go under REITs. So from an investor's perspective, it's great. And they're all grade A buildings with grade A tenants and so on and so forth. There's some tax issue which I'm hopeful government will solve for, the trust and the investment and the land cost and transfer of the asset into the trust and so on and so on, making very inconvenient because I love our government. I love what the vision that they have for this country and the way this country is now reached center stage with everything that they have promoted for our country. You really don't need to sell India to anyone today. But I genuinely think that we need a little better implementation strategy for most of the great visions that we have. It happens with developers also. We have great visions, but obviously sometimes when we screw up in our implementation strategy and we learn. So I'm hopeful that will change. Once that change, REITs will be a great asset for investment. So when you look at SIPs and mutual funds, people will start investing in REITs.
Got it. It's matter of time that.
Yeah, and I think the new regulation that has come for SMEs also, where they want 50 to 500 crore small size REITs, where even a one floor of a rental income asset becomes a REITable asset in that class.
Got
So
it.
It'll be great.
Hoping for the time to come for this thing to boost up.
Yeah.
What is your whole thought about fintech? Not being able to know much about fintech. I know there are great platforms, great companies have done well in fintech.
So fintech is a opportunity for the financial sector to literally change the way they look at lending, because regulation is coming down heavy on fintech. I think fintech is a great platform. They have the freedom to literally solve problems for the mass in general. Banks largely are a mass product. It is for the end consumer and the smallest consumer. Fintech today is taking over the end consumer and the smallest consumer. So I'm very, very happy and proud to see fintech evolve. It still needs time, because people thought that they could do anything under fintech, assuming that the regulators will not come down heavy on them. And from someone who basically, we live regulation in real estate. Every part of our business is regulated. From the minute you wake up and you try and set up an asset and buy your land to the minute you sell an apartment, everything is regulated. So fintech really didn't have that much regulation. Today, when they're coming under the regulator's purview, they are starting to reinvent themselves. A lot of microfinance and SME lending will evolve with fintech coming in. Your loans to your small shop owners, farmers, businesses, retail businesses will really benefit with fintech. I think consumer loans and home loans will benefit a lot from fintech. It still needs to evolve to a sizable value for it to have an impact in developer loans. So that's how I look at it.
So it's majorly consumer end product, and
it's simplification of the process for the end consumer.
It will take its time, a lot of time.
It will take
for
its time.
entering into the
A lot of regulation will come their way. I can see regulators coming down. Anything that becomes a buzzword or becomes an interest or becomes an ability for you to be in the eye of a regulator will always have things come in its way.
Got it. You are an angel investor.
I am an angel investor. Yes, I invest in startups. I do.
How many startups?
A couple, but I think I largely believe in partnerships and associations. And I believe that it's not about just you, it's about everyone growing together. And with that, we created a PropTech fund as well for the industry at large. I'll talk about it in a bit. But I think the day Tata started 100 years back, they were a startup. You need to have a entrepreneur or a founder which has the fire to build a Tata or has the fire to survive as long so that the organization becomes huge. Startup funding was something that because money was available, people took it, people abused it, right from their housemaid to their drivers' personal salaries was all put in the company thing. Admin cost was ballooned, and everyone showed a negative burn, and they kind of got money and they kept building it. Only when people burned their hands, they understood of looking at the bottom line in a startup and not just looking at your top line and multiplying it to give a multiplier effect. I think that's a mindset that even your startup founders need to start accepting, because contrary to what people thought, there is no free meal in life. Money needs to make money, and there's no point in trying to get money, or there's no point in investing money if your money doesn't make money. And that has always been my mindset when I look at putting money in any startup. I need to know how my money is going to make money and how am I going to get my money back. Because this concept, put money, it will go get listed, you will get your money back. Those are great stories. But money needs to make money, and money needs to return money. Both aspects need to get closed by startups upfront. It's okay if you come back and say that, you know what, you've put money, my valuation will get X in 5 years, 10 years, and I'll give you your money in that many years. But that end game needs to come in. So it gets a little tough for startups to convince me to put money in them. But I have. And I think for me, 2 places I've really looked at. One is EdTech, because I'm passionate about education. And second is obviously real estate. So that's how I work at it. And I think I get looked at as a tough nut to get cracked because I negotiate a lot. Okay, I really like negotiating, and I like negotiating to the extent that once I remember our loan proposal was going to an investment committee for a bank, and one of not the bankers but an external board member of the bank stood up and said, "Oh, I know this person. I know why your terms are like this. They have negotiated a lot, and I know she negotiates a lot. They're very clear they want it in their way or it's no way." So that is the kind of image.
What is your negotiation strategy?
I understand lending because I spent my time with lenders. And because I understand their business, I figure out how to negotiate. I understand law. I'm telling you, I have read every document.
You know the one in front of you's model and what is good for them as well. So
I make it a win-win. I don't negotiate where I take more and I don't leave anything for them. I make it a win-win. But I believe in one thing. I will only sign on a paper that I can deliver. I cannot sign random things and random clauses and random covenants because that is something that their board will approve. I'm happy that is what your board approves, but this is what I can deliver. I don't want to sign something that only because your board will approve, I will sign it. I will sign what I can deliver because I am responsible, not your board. I am undertaking to pay you interest, not your board. So either they are okay with what I can deliver and they'll give me money. Otherwise, I don't want their money because I don't want to spoil my relationship with any of my bankers. I really love them. They're my friends. I would love to go and have coffee with them, but I don't want to spoil my relationship with them just because I want a loan from them basis what their board will approve. That's not how it works. Because I know my project, I know what I can give you as a return, and I know how it is going to pay that money. And just because I want my money doesn't mean I will sign anything you give me. I will read everything. No, it should make sense. It cannot say that I'm signing for my neighbor. I don't have the authority to sign it. So I look at all those things and I do it that way. It gets tough for them at times, but that's how it works. Why should I sign something I can't deliver? And I say this very, very, I would say, openly, that papers survive more than people. If you don't have your paperwork in place, it is very tough later on in life when things go wrong. So that's why I look at my paperwork very minutely. As boring as it may sound, but that's what I do.
Any experience that has given you this lesson?
2008, our paperwork was not great.
Okay.
And I remember my first negotiation, ironically, it was with Gitanjali only, and who's now on my fund, and she's a great friend. But I negotiated a term sheet threadbare with her, and she's like, nobody in my life has negotiated a term sheet over here at Rustomjee so much as you are. I said, but I will negotiate every clause. A, I understand it. B, what I can't deliver to you, why should I sign to you just because you want me to sign it? I should be able to deliver it to you, no? So that was my start. And yeah,
I've heard from a lot of people that we are debt free. We don't want to take debt. So what I feel, if you want to expand or grow your business, it is a mandatory thing that you'll have to do to grow and expand. You have any opinion on that?
I don't believe in the concept of debt free. I think that's a statement to sound cool. And that's a statement where you want to tell the world that, hey,
you are satisfied.
I don't have debt, and I'm a better person than that person. There's no concept of debt free. Please understand, every kind of money that you have is a debt. When you are building an apartment for a customer, the money that he gives it to you in installments. In case he cancels, you have to pay him back. It's a liability. Okay, in case you screw up in your asset, you have to pay back your customer. It is a liability. So this concept of debt-free is a great concept as a concept. As an organization, even we endeavor to be debt-free. But is that possible as a concept? No. Because you need to understand, we are in the business of real estate. We are not in manufacturing. We don't need to put one-time money in building a manufacturing plant. Every project is a manufacturing plant for us. There's only that much equity that one has. How much of money you raise from all pools on this earth? For real estate, it is very less. This industry is 7% of India's GDP. That is the value that this industry is looking at. And if that much is your revenue, 7x Bombay, everywhere else, 90% of that is your cost. So 7% of India's GDP, 90% of that is the capital that you need to finish a project. If people feel that being debt-free is going to get them that number, that's great, but it's not possible. And debt is not a bad thing. Overtaking debt and using debt from one project to another project is a bad thing. It's very easy to blame the system when the problem is your personal discipline. We realized that in 2008, and we have done zero leverage asset A for asset B since then. Not once. And that has been our personal discipline. That has been this thing. It's okay to pay more, take private equity, give the return and exit it, but don't mess one asset because of the other asset. We don't do it. Which is tough for someone to kind of have. And just because you don't have the discipline doesn't mean that is a bad thing. It is very important. Trust me, from the point of your, even the bill that you have, the money bill is a debt. It's a debt paper. It's a CP. It's IOU. So it's a debt. It's not like free money. Nothing is that. And I don't think debt should be typecasted as a bad thing. It's a catalyst for your growth. Learn to use it right. If you abuse it, you will also not grow. Just because you are not able to use it right doesn't mean that debt as a word is a bad word. It's not. If you look at the guy who wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he very bashfully says that I make so much, but I take debt and I write off my income as interest payment, and I grow my asset base, I grow my real estate asset base through that, and I make losses and I don't pay taxes. He's using debt for a different reason, but he also takes his debt, yeah?
That is good.
It's got its benefits also.
Fair. Coming to the PropTech industry and the $100 million fund also that is there. Can you elaborate on how people can get access to that fund, and even you as an angel investor, what do you see the PropTech industry going further?
I think it's a great industry. Real estate does not have too much tech. It is still very primitive. 7% of India's GDP is real estate. There are projections that will become 15%. 90% of it is largely cost, 85 to 90% of it. If 85 to 90% is cost, you can imagine the size of the PropTech industry. that can be created by simplifying cost or sales items in it. This is pure real estate. If you take on allied industries, there are more than 250 allied industries that support real estate as a sector. If you just look at innovation that can come in and simplify your life, why not? And it has got great potential. I think we still build our buildings the same way. We still design them the same way. We still look at it the same way. But the lockdown taught us to use tech better. Who knew Zoom will be a way in which you can do meetings? A lot of people do virtual meetings and make proper use of your time. Imagine doing PropTech and making proper use of the process in which you build a asset. So it's a great industry. 2021, when we did our first banking conference, we had a couple of family offices on it, and Venture Catalyst was on that event with us, and that was a virtual event. It was an in-person event, but our speakers were virtual, all three of them. And that's where the conversation started about PropTech and doing a PropTech fund. And we built it. We built it with Venture Catalyst. We are co-founders in that fund. I think the major part of it is, and I think this is what Baman Uncle always says, is that the only unknown that is going to come our way is going to be technology, which will change the way we do our businesses. And if you really want to be a part of change, you should partner with it upfront. Tech is changing us, and we should, as an industry, partner with it. And that is why we went and created this fund where the industry is partnering with the founders and the partners, and the industry will come forward and work with the founders and give them the knowledge that we face as problems. We are so used to our problems, and we are so used to someone coming and crapping on our table every morning, and then we get back to the same way in which we have to solve that problem, that we get very, myopic in the way we are approaching it. But a tech guy, a third party, will look at our problems and find a solution which will make our life simpler. So that's how we are building it, where the founders and the industry will work hand in hand. Their products will get a marketplace to test. We will give them insights and inputs of how to make it better and grow it. I think everyone should be part of this. Unfortunately, as an AIF, you need 1 crore to be part of the fund. So people who are interested in it, we are on the fundraise right now because we are building up the fund right now. More than happy to get you connected with everyone to kind of, partner and be part of that process. People who want to contribute or want to come in with ideas and want to pitch, there are pitching rounds going on where founders are coming and pitch to us, and there's an IC and there's an entire external team that has been built with Venture Catalyst. Happy to get you connected with them and take it ahead. I think it's a great platform for any real estate PropTech company to come in and literally build your idea with us. It's not, so you have incubators and you have funds. This is the first time it is merging together. And if you look at, Oyo, WeWork, housing, those are all PropTechs. There are so many unicorns that have been created out of PropTechs. Infra.market is one. And real estate as an asset class, as much as we don't realize it, but from the first day that humans existed to now, it's always that real estate has been a part of your life. Every part of your life is real estate. You stay in a house, you work in an office, you go to a mall, you go to a hotel. Everything is real estate. Caves were real estate. Tree houses were real estate. That's been the evolution. And one of the reasons why I love this industry is this is the industry which is literally leaving a mark on the face of this earth for centuries and generations. Even today, we are intrigued to go and see some cave house, or we're intrigued to go and see, the tree houses. We are, because that's how people define their existence. And what better way than to be part of that and leave a mark which centuries down the line, someone is going to come and say, this building, this person and all. So that's why I love this sector so much. So that's why PropTech, because you are literally being part of the change that's going to happen over there.
Just regarding fitness, you are into fitness.
I am. I do something called SoFit. And I am very... So fitness is a way of life. Okay? And I've always been someone who's been into athletics. I used to play basketball for school and handball, and I've represented Bombay in districts and so on and so forth. So I've always been passionate towards sports and fitness, and I used to always also still go in the mornings and so on and so forth. Lockdown is sometime when I joined something called SOFIT, and it is I thank them for really taking care of my health. I did not know I was lactose intolerant until I stopped lactose entirely, and SOFIT helped me with that journey. So I'm literally gluten free, sugar free, lactose free after that, and I love it. I think for me, my daily workout is my meditation. So it's not just fitness for me; it's my reset. So I do my workout, and I am back to myself, and I get my energy to kind of go ahead with the next day. It's something that I think as my body, I need to do some amount of fitness every day. So whether it's a run or a walk or something, I do something every day, which is my reset. So that's my thing. And it's not about your workout. It's about what you put in after your workout into your body. And we don't realize it, but we abuse our systems more than anything. And SOFIT has helped me kind of, change that entire thing. And plus the community is so strong. They're literally there for you. And if you don't do your workout, for me, it works because it's an offline platform. They'll give you a workout. So no matter where you are, you can finish it at your own convenience and kind of get done with it. And if you don't do it, you feel so much of FOMO that you feel so bad that you've missed your workout that you genuinely go and work out, any of your free days and kind of on your rest days and kind of do it. One thing that we don't understand is recovery is as important as workouts, which is one more thing that SOFIT inculcated with me. And I have a Whoop band which I wear.
Which is what I noticed and asked you about fitness.
I've been wearing it for some time, largely because of the fact that we overstrain ourselves in everything that we do, and we don't really know how much we should strain ourselves for the day. And this has been my savior in very large ways. Yeah. I wouldn't replace it for anything. Everyone has something or the other. They have that ultra human, they have that ring, they have this and that. But I think this is the best. I have it all the time. I have it when I'm sleeping. I have it when I'm awake. It tells me how much I've slept. It tells me how much I've recovered. So I'm in a position to plan my next day. I don't do too much of strenuous things on the days I don't have a great recovery. A lot of my friends have bought this after me. But I think this is genuinely something that has helped me in constantly being and live my life the way I have to live it on the run. That's why.
It's the thing I have been looking at since past few days.
But Whoop?
Yeah.
It's great. They have improved it. They have got an entire AI. So they have a coach that talks to you now. It tells you how much is your debt, sleep debt. It tells you how much you need to recover. It tells you how much you need to sleep more for today. So I am thankful of the fact that I have this. And it tells me how much I can push myself for the day. So I don't overtrain. I don't overstrain. And I spend enough amount of time in recovery because we don't really realize it, but we abuse our bodies so much in the day with all the sitting and all the car travel and travel in the city that we don't realize that even that is strenuous on you. And if you, after all of that, also go and do a workout and double strain yourself, your recovery for the next couple of days gets screwed, and then you're not fully there. It's like you're there, but you're not fully there. That's not going to add value to you on your daily goals. So that's why I have it.
Got it. Soon I get it.
You should. I'm telling you, it's a great thing to have. Whoop should pay us for this podcast for marketing.
100%. Yeah, we'll have to ask them for.
Ask them to sponsor.
We'll have to.
Yeah, ask them to sponsor a podcast.
You have done a great marketing. Coming to concluding the podcast, for me it was a very good learning lesson. I've not been that much friendly with finance, and knowing that you being a marketing major and doing such good in the finance industry really looks something to look up to. Like, it doesn't matter really that तुम finance करो, college वगैरह में नहीं करो. It's
उनको college में कुछ नहीं सिखाते. जो college में सिखाते हैं, you have to unlearn that the day you join your work. Trust me. I am telling you this because everything that I learned from college is a base, but none of this is what helped me with
career.
No, I mean it's like I told you, education system in India needs a lot of change. Okay, but that apart, I think it gives you a base, but your work teaches you what you really need to do, and that's how it's for me. And I genuinely never thought marketing will help, but it helps.
And today has also opened my eyes for like how big is the finance important and how important it is for working of an organization. It's can be said heart or brain of the body compared to like and also the importance of having your own team member doing the finance for your company, because that's not what I've witnessed for a very good amount of period of time. Apart from that, many other things, fintech, prop tech. It was a good podcast today, and would love to have you again, learn more from you, maybe someday else along with some other people.
Done. Sounds like a plan for sure. But thank you so much for having me. I think you're doing a great job. I think you've genuinely built an IP as for an industry. Like I said, it's very not tech driven. This is in a way a tech, and you've built an IP where the right person, where a person can get the right answer to a lot of conversations on real estate. People don't understand what real estate is heavily regulated. There are a lot of various things that go into build it, and you're doing a great job in bringing those problems forth. And I know, being a developer yourself, coming from that background, you've seen your father struggle, and you know, it is not easy to build a building, but people look at the fanciness that comes with the sector and feel that, oh, this person is very cushy, बहुत पैसा है, बहुत अच्छी गाड़ी है, मतलब like full-fledged, बहुत ऐश करते हैं, जब भी देखो they are traveling abroad, so they feel that developers are very fancy, but they don't realize the risk that developers take. And we generally, I think finally we're getting rewarded for it, and it's people like you that are propagating the fact that this industry has problems that developers solve. And all the developers that have come in on your podcast have kind of brought that out in a very beautiful way, and I'm very thankful to you for bringing it out. You know, it's not easy to sell a developer to an industry where the world wants to typecast you as you know, a family member from the Dawood family, but it's great to see you kind of, you know, bring that out, and genuinely thank you.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to seeing the podcast and many more of your such podcasts.
I'm looking forward to having you again.
Happy
you so
to
much.
come in again. Thanks so much.